Yeah, well, right.
We got
If we get a call to that
we got a
effect, we'll
caller
get back
waiting,
on
and
it,
there's
but-
probably other callers getting ready to call in, so I don't want to derail this. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Doing fine. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for waiting.
I just the topic I been thinking about lately is just how poor people are at explaining why they do things. And not so much little things like, you know, I got in my car to go to work, but
Right.
explaining their motivation, basically. And it's a difficult thing to do, even on your own, to your own self. Why did I react that way? And you can sort of backfill your reasons with what you think is a good way of explaining things, but it's a really hard thing to do. I am very distrusting of people's ability to accurately explain their own motivations, at least without a lot of thought. And I think that that is a factor in a lot of disconnects people have when they're talking about things, because their explanation is, I think, faulty about their own motivations.
Yeah, I think I'm in complete agreement. I don't know if maybe you've got a specific example you'd want to point out, but I think kind of what you're saying is that we don't have a good enough understanding of ourselves and why we do what we do, and the way our brains work, the way we go about not only making decisions but trying to understand decisions. We take lots and lots of mental shortcuts and assumptions and inferences, and maybe it's I can't even come up with a good example. There's got to be some situation that.
I think a lot of it can be tied back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of all of us sort of growing up in the same culture with shared cultural experiences. And so the result of that is that people adopt many shared beliefs without really even thinking about it. In other words, it's just part of your cultural conditioning and programming. And so, whereas on the one hand, you'll have, for example, in the religious community, the real hyper-fundamentalists and the people who get out there and preach the stuff and who memorize Bible verses and you know, write books and get into apologetics and that sort of thing. You know, they're the folks who are really trying to kind of wrap their heads around the religious beliefs that they've been brought up in. I think a lot of people, a lot of your rank and file Christians, you know, they say like the people who go to church on Easter and Christmas, and they say they believe in God, but their religious belief is not really a thing that they analyze to a great deal of it. You know, they're sort of living the unexamined life in terms of that sort of thing, and they do it simply because, well, it doesn't occur to them not to do it, because it's part of, again, of their upbringing, their cultural, if you want to call it conditioning, programming, what have you, and so, you know, when you actually like try to sit a person down and say, well, think about this for a minute. Okay, you say you say you're opposed to gay marriage. Well, why? And then they'll give you this litany of reasons. Okay, well, think about that though. I mean, if you've been taught, say, by someone from the pulpit or just people in your bridge club or whatever, well, it's a threat to traditional marriage. Well, how? Well, think about that for a minute. Like if, for example, if gay and lesbian couples are allowed to marry, and you're being told that's a threat to your marriage, what do you think will happen? You think the minute that becomes legal, will it mean that you have to divorce your wife or husband and go marry someone of the same sex? Like that Onion article where, you know, the state of Massachusetts forces everyone to gay marry, or something like that. You know, if you think that that's really going to happen, of course, you know, just think about what you're being told. And I think a lot of people just sort of accept what they're told by authority figures and just by, again, their own upbringing and what they're absorbed in their culture. And it doesn't occur to them to kind of go, well, do I really need to? I mean,
I think
is there a good reason for believing that?
Not only do I agree with the point that Steve's making, I think we could set aside religious or contentious issues and just concentrate on simple things. Slapstick comedy. Why do I laugh at that? Why would I laugh at somebody else being injured? Because it's not just what happens on the screen. I mean, if I'm walking down an aisle at a grocery store and you know, somebody slips and falls and busts their butt, I'm tempted to laugh. And I have to think that the reason behind that is laughter can be a reaction to all kinds of things, including uncomfortable situations. But does it mean that I'm somehow evil, that I'm glad this happened to them and not to me? Or is it me connecting with them, that I can recognize that I've done something in the past, or I'm likely to do something in the future, that's going to make me the recipient of the humor, so I'm hoping that it's more of a laugh with them than a laugh at them?
Well, laughter is one of those involuntary kind of responses that you do it, and then you'd like to explain why you did it in a way that doesn't feel like you're a bad person. But, you know, it's really hard to be so controlled that you don't laugh when you think something's funny. I mean, no matter whether you should or shouldn't.
Yeah, I hear a lot of, you know, there's that nervous laughter, right, which you let loose whenever you're not quite sure how to respond to something. You get some strange...
Like when somebody's told a racist joke and around a group of people, and you get, like, nervous laughter.
Yeah, yeah, or something like something, you know,
Another
or when someone
example
slips and falls.
that I was just thinking about, you know, when you feel like you should stop at somebody, or, you know, you pull over and help somebody, or you've done something, I guess, good, but why did you do it? And you could go back and say, well, I was raised that way, or, you know I'm supposed to be that way, or I wish I analyzed it and thought, well, if I do this, then maybe people will help me. But really, I think it's more like laughing in a way. It's like at the moment when you see it, it's like, I should do this, and then you kind of create the explanation when you think about it later. At least, well, I'm not saying everyone is like that, but I feel like I'm not necessarily aware of my immediate reasons for doing things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into the discussion of morality and why people are moral or immoral or whatever, or how they make those decisions, I think that's when this comes into play a lot. That we do act a certain way, and we do care about other people, or we are motivated somehow to do things that are participating in taking care of each other. But why do we do it? Well, we don't just sit down and plan it out with a carefully 17-point plan of exactly why. It's
sure, but I think that's actually one of the benefits. I'm not saying that we don't understand. And one of the benefits one of the benefits is that we can sit down and suss out what would be an appropriate ethical action in a given situation and why. Granted, it's going to be perhaps slightly different for different individuals, but that is something we can actually talk about and kind of come to some decision. You're talking about pulling over to help somebody on the side of the road. I've been in situations where I've done it. I'm sure, well, maybe not most people, but quite a few people have pulled over and helped someone on the side of the road. And I've also driven right past somebody who obviously needed assistance, even when I didn't have anything, I wasn't in a hurry to get somewhere.
Yeah, it's never this sort of consistent thing, or sometimes, or maybe with some people it is, but I think with most people, you'll tend to have a situation where, you'll just do it. A lot of it may have to do with the mood you're in. If you're having a good day,
right,
you may be more disposed to, spread the love a little bit, whereas if you're just kind of feeling cranky, or you've had a rough day at work, or argued with your boss or your spouse or something, or you got to go to the bathroom real bad, or whatever it is that's giving you, just making you feel, you may be less inclined to do something.
Feeling antisocial at the moment.
Yeah.
But the way I see the benefit of being able to think about it is that if you take the time, which I think is kind of what Steve's suggesting as well, that we're so bad about knowing what our motivations are, that if you take the time to actually think about it and find out, even if you couldn't possibly discover what your current motivations are, you can understand yourself better, you can understand situations better, to where you can change your behavior to such a way that you follow a pattern that you're more comfortable with and you understand better. To where you can say, I could sit here right now and tell myself, anytime that I am not in a hurry to get somewhere, where I am not in a time-critical situation, and there's somebody on the side of the road who needs assistance, I should pull over and stop and help them. Why should I do that? Well, I think probably the best explanation comes from the promotion of memes. That if we had more, and it kind of ties into one of my ethical propositions, which is, if everybody did this, would the world be a better place or a worse place? And I think that if everybody offered assistance like this, the world would be a better place, and therefore I think it's probably
you can just look at the practical consequences of the act.
Yeah, I don't need some divine being to tell me that it's nice to pull over and help somebody who's got a flat tire, or may have had something happen. Even just offer myself.
And because I had the experience where I was on the receiving end of the help at one point in a situation where if I had not been, I really would have been in a world of hurt, because I was again driving out west, and so I'm on this stretch of I-10 between Austin and El Paso, where there's nothing for hundreds of miles, nothing but desert and just scrub, and I blew a tire. And so I look at it, and of course the spare is, it is an old hand-me-down car from my mom. So open the trunk, no spare. So I'm SOL. So I finally just, realized, all right, I have no choice. So I just have to stand there on the side of the road. First dude, first guy. I could have been there for hours. I could have been there all day. I could have been there until dark. First dude that came by was some kid like driving home from college. Picked me up, took me to the nearest town, which was maybe like a 30-minute drive, bought a tire, and, stayed at the place while the guy put the new tire on the wheel, drove me all the way back to my car, and I changed the tire, and we parted. And so that was like an hour or so out of his way that he went to do that. And so because that happened to me in a situation where if I hadn't been that lucky, I would have been in some serious, serious trouble, stranded in the middle of the desert.
I'm wondering, though, if that's a factor. Seeing somebody pulled over on the side of the road on a busy freeway in Austin, you think, somebody else will probably come along and help them soon.
Maybe
Seeing somebody out in the middle of nowhere,
that could have been it. So certainly, I would be, always sort of mindful of, the kind of the potential psycho factor, which it just comes from watching maybe too many movies. But at the same time, it might be a situation where if I'm in lay boonies and I see somebody, just stranded and hopeless, I might be more inclined to pull over and see if they're all right, rather than if it's just on Lamar, where there's a place within walking distance they could probably go to and get, so that could be a factor. But because I was on the receiving end of that, I'm more likely to, as the saying goes, pay it forward in future.
So what do you think we ought to do, Steve, given your proposition seems to be true? I think we've both demonstrated that we're not particularly keen on understand or knowledgeable about why we do the things we do.
No, and that, that's the point. And one of the things you'll run into, though, there's people that, the way they talk, they are absolutely certain of absolutely why they do everything they do. And a lot of times, the explanation is, I'm good because I believe this, right? And it's got nothing to do with their motivation. It's just the explanation that they have pat ready to go for anything good they do. They did it because. It's a pre-made, ready explanation that is just right there at their fingertips, and it's not got anything to do with them doing the kinds of contemplation you're talking about doing, which is a good thing, to become familiar with why really do you really do things, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a lot easier to say that,
You're right.
Jesus wants us to love each other and turn the other cheek and be nice to each other, and therefore that leads us to do things like pulling over the side of the road.
Yeah.
That's simpler.
The day I was in the mood to pull over on the side of the road, and I did it, that day was because Jesus wanted me to. That's why I did it. The day I didn't, well, I wouldn't,
Jesus didn't,
day doesn't exist, or, didn't happen. Or,
I think the bigger objection that I have, granted, it's a simpler answer. It's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily a way to come to a better understanding of who you are, who we are, whatever. My biggest objection, I think, is that if I'm over on the side of the road with a flat tire, and somebody pulls over because they think Jesus wants them to, then it's likely they think Jesus wants them to stand there and preach at me while they help me in my situation. And if that's the case, keep driving.
Yeah.
I'd rather, and I say that, humorously, because I get lots of email from people that don't seem to understand that, I was a believer for, 20 some odd years and, studying with the purpose of being a minister. So I've not only heard my fair share of sermons, I've composed a couple, and I've been in those situations. Help me with my tire.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, after you've helped me with the tire, invite me to your church, I have no objection to that.
Yeah.
It's just the same thing as if I invited you to the ACA happy hour.
Yeah,
and I'll go to church. I've gone to church lots of times.
If you decide to help somebody change their tire, you have two reasons for doing it. Either you just want to help them change their tire so they can get on their way, just because you're a cool person, or you have some sort of ulterior motive, like, well, maybe I can get this person to come to my church. If there's an ulterior motive to why you're doing what you're doing, however good you may think it is, at that point, that's maybe
altruism's out the window then.
Yeah, that's maybe when you really ought to question how moral your decision-making process is. If it's not, if it's not done through altruism, but through some sort of ulterior motive.
Well, in between the two is when you feel good because you did something for somebody. That is something that feels good to you.
Yeah.
And then you can explain that feeling good a bunch of different ways. But that's a reason why people help each other out. Why they feel good is something that needs to be explained, but
I think it's probably more than enough.
Yeah.
It's good enough reason for me to do things.
Yeah.
Not that I'm, just the altruistic helper to the world, But when I do something nice for somebody, it feels good.
Yeah, there is that sort of reward mechanism that just naturally gets kicked in, just knowing that you've done something for someone, and as a result they think you're a cool person, and so that's just all in terms of it's an esteem booster, and
who would want to go through life being miserable and hated? That's a concept I don't understand.
Yeah.
If it made you miserable to help people, then obviously nobody'd be doing it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gosh, why did I help that guy with his tire?
Take care, y'all.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for the call. That's interesting. Interesting thing to think about. We really, really don't think a lot of times about why we do what we do. We do a lot of stuff in terms of just it just could be ingrained in our personalities, and that's based on lifetime of experiences.
Yeah.
Like I said, for my I really hadn't thought about that kind of situation that I was in West Texas until I was in it.
Right.
And then that sort of made me realize, I could have been in a great deal of trouble then, and so I'm very grateful to this guy for going out of his way to help me out. If I'm ever in that situation, I hope that I can be, someone who does the same thing and who, is that kind of a helper.
Yeah, I was mentioning, kind of like this, my own views on what determines what is ethically proper or not. I only have a couple of kind of adages that I try to apply to my life now. One is that I'd like to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And the reason you have to include both of those is because if you just want to believe as many true things as possible, believe everything, because then by definition you'll believe it. But the filtering mechanism that gets rid of the false beliefs is what allows you to make good decisions. It allows you to make decisions that are consistent with reality and not just based, or not just the result of bad reasoning,
wishes,
arguments,
preferences.
Hey, I really wish such and such, and so I'm going to act as if it's true. Well, then everybody's a lottery winner if you start thinking like that.
Or a stalker.
The second one is when I'm considering is to acknowledge right off the bat that beliefs are the result of being convinced of the truth or likely truth of a proposition. Beliefs inform your actions, and actions have consequences both for you and for other people. And so I ask myself, if everybody else did this, would we be better off or worse off? And there's the possibility that neutral as well. But in general, if we would be better off if everybody did this, then it's something that I think we should not only try to do, but encourage others to do as well.
Yeah, it becomes the rational choice at that point.
And it's true in some sense that you can't get from an is to an ought, which is where we have these big discussions about can science and reason lead us to a proper ethical system. And they get up there and say, well, you can't get from an is to an ought. Well, that's technically true. It's just not really true, because you can get from a handful of ises to an ought. You can get from an is to an ought as long as you have some condition or goal that you're trying to meet.
Yeah, we have get a lot of this going on in like the comments of the blog, where Christians will come up and they'll just proclaim that science can't do things like determine the results of love or kindness or what have you. You can't get there through a scientific understanding of things. And I think that's just complete nonsense. I mean, if all science is, if the meaning of the word science, if you go back to its Latin root, is knowledge, right? And if you can think about things in this sort of rational context, as you've done, where say, all right, would the human race, would everybody be better off if everyone behaved this way or if everyone behaved that way?
Right.
And just understanding what the consequences of certain actions were. Well, you are essentially applying a form of scientific inquiry to that question.
Yeah.
That question of, what would be the result if people behaved in a loving, kind, generous manner to each other, or belligerent, unfriendly, manner to one another. What would be the consequences of those kinds of behaviors, dictating how we are in society and culture at large? What would be the results? Well, you can predict the results fairly easily, and say, well, one's better than the other. That's a form of scientific inquiry.
Yeah, I don't need to know what the absolute best or absolute worst action is to be able to take two actions and consequences and figure out which one's better and which one's worse. We often have had discussions when we talk about ethics and morality of, well, you atheists don't believe in anything. You're these moral subjectivists where you can just pick whatever. You don't believe in absolute moral values.
Thanks
to Dennis, I've actually said freely on the show before, I do accept absolute morals. In that if you take given a situation and analyze every possible action, one of them eventually has to be the most beneficial, positively beneficial, and least negative, and have the least negative impact on the situation. That would be what I would consider to be the absolute standard for a moral or ethical path. Are we there? No. But I think that's what we should be trying to do. Not find out what the absolute is, but analyze the consequences to figure out how we can gradually move towards that, how we can treat people better, how we can guarantee the rights of every individual. This whole thing about church-state separation, it's not just atheists are offended because you want to put God all over everything. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It's a divisive, exclusive action to put above the speaker podium, "In God we trust." It was divisive and exclusive when the U.S. Congress did it in the 50s as the result of this McCarthy-era, hey, we don't want to be godless communists, so let's slap God on everything. It was a violation of the First Amendment then. It's just that it's difficult to challenge. And with the Supreme Court makeup, it's going to be more difficult to challenge, not just because of the way they're more likely to rule, but because they keep saying you don't have standing. You can't even bring the case. You can't even bring the objection.
I've always wondered why it's so important to a great many Christians that their religions have to have some sort of governmental validation.
Yeah.
Why in the world they can't just be? I mean, there's millions and millions and millions of churches around the country, and they can go and engage in their religious activities there and in their homes, and they can throw picnics and they can do their social activities. And so why they then need to just insist on prayer at football games and at every single activity suddenly, they want to just
days of prayer.
Yeah, and I think it's this sort of religious showboating that even if you can even look at the Gospels.
Like they've never read Matthew 5 where they're told to pray in private.
Yeah, go into your closet or do whatever, and don't listen to the hypocrites on the street corners, that sort of thing.
Don't do your boasting and praying in public like those Pharisees.
You pull that one out, and they kind of get annoyed with you whenever.
Yeah.
So Jesus doesn't want he doesn't want you to pray at the football game where
Both teams are praying, by the way. So I mean, what other position could he possibly take other than?
So I've never really understood
why
that governmental validation is so crucial to them. I think it's just some kind of a way of wanting to sort of rub it in everyone else's noses, and it comes down to this sort of mob rule concept that they have of what democracy is.
And I think it's different.
Yeah, you do.
I think it's fear. I think that among the bulk of, especially, and I don't want to just label it Christians, but let's face it, we live in the United States. We're 75-80% Christian. The people who are doing these things
are the Christians.
It's the Christians that want God on our money and God up all over the place. I think it's fear-based. I think that they've noticed that. Well, first of all, they have delusions and misperceptions about what this country was founded on.
Well, sure.
We've gone through the myth of a Christian nation about 1 billion times on the show.
And again, it's the whole mob rule concept of what they think democracy means, where it's, well, if the majority wants it, then that's the way it is. It's like, no. The way our democracy works in America is we have this document called the Constitution, whereas, it respects what the majority may want, but at the same time, whatever majority decision is made, there are protections for the minorities in place as, that allow everyone to sort of, all of us to try to kind of get along. Whereas, a democracy, as somebody may once said, is, if democracy is just two wolves and a sheep trying to decide what's for dinner, in our culture, the Constitution is the document that says it ain't going to be the sheep.
Right. Everybody gets to vote, but you can't, no matter how the vote comes out, the sheep doesn't get eaten.
And that is something that the conservative Christians don't really seem to grok, this whole idea of, well, we're the majority, and so, you just need to kind of, be tolerant of us. That's the funny thing, is that they think that it's intolerance towards them.
Right.
But at the same time, they want to be the majority.
And one thing that this comes out of, and it kind of gets back to the fear, they don't realize, first of all, that one of the reasons we have the church-state separation protections in the First Amendment is specifically because some Protestants got together in Virginia and said, whoa, we don't want the state supporting these other religions that we don't like, and we're the minority here. We need something that's going to protect our rights, so let's just make sure that the religion stays out of the church stays out of the Well, religion stays out of the state stays out of religion, that way we're all free to practice whatever. And now that these same individuals, or these same groups, I mean, obviously the individuals are dead, but the same groups have gotten to a point where they have a good power base, now they're just disregarding what their founding fathers said, and they're trying to reverse it. And I think it's out of fear because they noticed, as Governor Rick Perry here in Texas, he went on the 700 Club to say that secularism is a virus that's destroying the country. And this type of message has been beaten into the head of some extreme right Christian conservatives who, rather than investigating or knowing anything about history or what's really going on, think, oh my gosh, the atheists are kind of, they
On the
took
warpath.
They took prayer out of school. No, they didn't. They took state-led prayer out of school. Your kid can still pray before any test that he didn't study for.
That's the distinction that they just can't grasp.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it is 150% legal for any student in any public school in America at this moment to drop to his knees and pray until he's blue in the face. No one will
dropping to knees may be a problem because if he's in a classroom, it could be a disruption.
Okay, dropping to knees. Oh, but out by your lockers, they're not going to stop you.
But you can pray, and you can have, and oh, by the way, there are Youth for Christ groups.
Yeah.
As the problem,
Young Life and all the rest of those. I mean, they can do that kind of stuff. You can take your Bible to school and read it in the lunchroom. No one's going to, and
I don't want them to stop you from doing that. Never have.
But it's this whole idea of the school itself as a government-sponsored body sitting everyone down and dictating a prayer to say, well, now whose prayer is it going to be? Is it going to be a Methodist prayer? Is it going to be a Presbyterian prayer?
Yeah.
Is it going to be some sort of Catholic Mass?
I mean, you have
what
to
are we
remember,
going to have?
it was first period. You come in, you say the Pledge of Allegiance, which we modify to stick in under God right before the word indivisible, thereby creating the most ironic change in history. And then you go on to do a Bible reading and a prayer. That's what was gotten rid of. They didn't take God out of school. They didn't take prayer out of school. And as I mentioned today during the lecture, I'm actually an advocate of comparative religion courses, Bibles, literature courses, all of these other electives that allow kids to learn about culture. And
But then, how in the hell in this culture are you going to get any of those kinds of elective courses that aren't coming prepackaged with some sort of ideological agenda behind them?
Easy.
Yeah.
Atheists approve the the curriculum and teach the courses. I mentioned it this morning.
That'll happen.
I guarantee you that I will not be proselytizing Christianity when I teach your kids about the Bible. And I'll also promise that I'm not just going to pick out the bad parts, just as long as we can both agree that the bad parts exist.
You can read all the sexy bits in Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
That's that's kind of the fun.
Or the gross things about spreading dung on your faces or whatever.